This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. Welcome back to The Forging Table. The mission of Undaunted.Life is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. At The Forging Table, you'll see a group of regular guys forging spiritual resilience by digging into God's Word, and we're welcoming all of you to come along on that journey. That's Zach, that's Eric, that's Matt. And guys, we're digging into Nehemiah 3 today, which we're just going to skip Nehemiah 3 because it's lame and useless, and it's just a bunch of names and, talking about gates of poo or whatever the dung gate is or something like that. And so, guys, I'm not being serious because there are different parts of the Bible, whether it's, entire books like Numbers or genealogies or, chapter 3 of Nehemiah, where it's like, well, there's nothing here. This isn't as easy to read and pull stuff from as one of the Pauline letters or something like that. There is something here for you in Nehemiah 3. And so, Matt, we were talking just off air a second ago about kind of because again, you didn't come into Nehemiah like excited. You're like, oh, I guess Kyle wants us to talk about Nehemiah. Let's talk about Nehemiah. And then you get to a chapter like chapter 3, and it's like you come off chapter 2, and there's so much happening. There's so much action. It's like an action movie that turns into like a study of how spreadsheets work. And it's just like it doesn't seem like there would be anything there, but you get a lot from this.
Oh, for sure. And I think, and I didn't say this, but this just kind of popped into my head. So in life, you can put projects or tasks into 3 days. Day 1, you're pumped. Like, hey, let's go. Everybody's enthused. Everybody's jazzed. Everybody's excited. Day 3, obviously, is the project is finished. But chapter 3 for me is day 2. You're in the muck and the mire of the day-to-day grind. You don't get to skip day 2 because that's often the most important part of the whole process. And it becomes this detailed account of what is going on. But like the reason that this is such an important part is that you see that real people are being put where they're at and they're being asked to build pretty much where they live. Like the wall backs up to their house. And so if they screw it up, like their house could be the first one that gets infiltrated and destroyed if somebody tries to get into the city. So it is important for you to have buy-in, but it's important for you to have personal buy-in. I think that's a big part of chapter 3.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me just add a little bit to that. So we just talked about the gauntlet being thrown down, right? Here we go. You have a leader that's gotten everybody involved. And now for the rest of this chapter, he goes through and describes specifically this guy, his daughter, they did this. This person, his son, they did this. This was their home. Not only is he describing really great facts, which I think ground the Bible and show that it's so authentic, but he's giving homage to the people that he's leading specifically. Yeah. Also, we're building the wall here that down the road, Jesus is going to ride the donkey through on the east gate. So let's put it in perspective what we're trying to accomplish. And I think there's a lot going on in this chapter, and I love this chapter for a lot of reasons. As a project planner type person, he's sitting here saying, man, look at this thing come together. Yeah. And he's so excited about it. And then we get to kind of read about it. So I think it's good to put yourself in that position and really think from what he's trying to write.
Yeah, and talking about like chapters that maybe don't feel like they have as much meat to them. I mean, I remember several years ago, a guy named Donald Miller, he wrote Blue Like Jazz, if you remember that long time ago. He's gone on to do other things, but I remember one time on his blog, he said something about like the Bible and its practicality. Maybe some of it's not as practical, and there's certain aspects that you maybe don't need to take into account. I remember going, whoa, what? I really like that book and I really like your writing, but I don't agree with that. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to start January 1st. I'm going to read my Bible plan, and I'm going to find something practical from every single day that I read. And you know what? I ended up in Numbers, and I ended up in this chapter and other chapters, and there was always something practical that I could take out of it, even if it felt dry. And that was kind of my, I don't know Don Miller, he doesn't know me, but it was just my challenge to myself to prove him wrong. There's not something practical that we can take from every single aspect, every single chapter of the Bible.
Well, even look at this. So Zach, you mentioned paying homage. So he's paying homage to people that are still alive while he's writing this, right? And so if you think about it from a management or leadership standpoint, the people in your team need to be acknowledged for the things that they do. Now, people's acknowledgement styles differ, because I'm a guy that if I do something for you and you don't acknowledge it and say thank you, I'm going to want to kill you. Right. Like that's just kind of like because I'm crazy. Like, but I also don't like heaping amounts of praise. So I need one little pat on the tushy, flat hand, not cupped. Right. And I need you to tell me, write it down. And it's like, just tell me once, hey man, really nice job. I'm really glad you really knocked that out of the park. But if you're like, oh my gosh, Kyle, that is simply the greatest thing I've ever seen. You're the smartest, you're the best. And if you keep going and going and going, I'm just going to walk away while you're talking. I'm going to make it as awkward as it could possibly be. So everyone's got their different style, but you're paying homage to these people that are so important to what you're doing. Because here's the other thing, and this kind of goes back to what you were talking about, Matt. He's paying the book of Nehemiah, like again, Ezra and Nehemiah used to be one book, and someone later decided to name it Nehemiah or whatever. This could have all been about Nehemiah and how great Nehemiah is, but he is naming people and naming their claim to the thing that they were rebuilding. That's deeper than thank you. And I would like to thank the blah, blah, blah family for building, this gate and for putting up this, whatever. No. He's like, they are a part of God's work, and he's acknowledging that from the very beginning.
I'd encourage you to go online and look at the videos of the wall now, just to get a sense.
Yeah, there's great ones on YouTube that you were
this work they're going through is no joke, and we know what they're about to face. And he's given. I mean, literally, it stood out. Like I think there's a goldsmith and this guy and his daughter, and they're just getting after it. That's, yeah.
And what's interesting is he's naming these folks that have done the work or are doing the work, but he also names the Tekoites. They're nobles. He said, but they didn't put their shoulders to the work. So it's like, yeah, so I'm going to call you out and your names are going to be in the Bible too.
But their nobles would not stop to serve their Lord.
There's obviously people there's people that are kind of waiting back like, okay, I'm going to let this play out before I, hitch my wagon to this. Maybe that's not the right word to use here. Hitch, unhitch.
Hi-oh.
But like they're waiting to see where is this thing going before I, maybe commit to this. So yeah, I think that's just a good life lesson. That happens in every situation. There are people that sit back and go, I don't know.
And it speaks to the body, right? Yeah. I mean, it took all of them independently doing their specific portion to make this thing happen.
Yeah. I think we'd be naive to think that all of these people got along too. So they're the fact that they are united for this common purpose just think of the people you go to work with. Like they're not all of them are your best friends, but you're still, accomplishing a job with them if you work in a company where you're working with a lot of people. So like the fact that there was this common ground that Nehemiah had pulled them all together, like that's just amazing to think about.
Yeah. One quick thing I heard, I'll never forget something I heard in college, which was Napoleon said that his key to success is careful preparation followed by rapid execution. So in this case, they didn't just mess around and plan forever and all that stuff. They got the plan done. They figured it out. But when they got to business, they got to business. And I think it was 52 days is what they said it took to get this accomplished. I mean, record time.
Can you say that again? The Napoleon's quote.
It was careful preparation followed by rapid execution.
Yeah, I like that.
It's like the prep that goes into like painting. Mm-hmm. You're going to put it, you've got to mask everything. It takes forever. It seems like, when are we going to get this done? And then the painting process is like that. If you've done it right, it just kind of goes super quick, When
it's talking about, it's the payoff of preparation.
Yeah.
Because part of the problem that you have is if you don't prepare for a project. So if you think about it like in a home improvement context, and yes, again, guys, I'm not the most handy person in the world, but it's your level of preparation will lead to the level of ease you have during the process. Now, when things happen during building, things just get messed up and you don't have your tool or something breaks or like that stuff happens. But there are a lot of people, Eric, that they don't spend the time taping off the areas they need to tape off or covering the furniture and flooring, and then they go to paint. And then they spill something or they make a mistake. Now they've got a second project, which is cleaning up the mess that they've made because their level of preparation was so low. And again, if you've seen anything from Nehemiah 1 and 2, is he was a prepared guy. He had his ducks in a row, which didn't mean that he didn't make mistakes or anything like that. But the level of preparation led to his level of success and the rapidity with which they were able to get the project done.
Well, there's a God thing too. I think Ben Franklin said haste makes waste, right? So later on in the chapters, some of these enemies and everything will look at it and say, well, even if a fox jumped on that, it would fall apart, But there's a God part of this, because in 52 days, they made a wall that stood for a very long time.
Yeah, I think you see the end product, you don't really know what goes into that. I think of Kobe Bryant, he shot 60 shots a game, right? We'll just say, let's just put it at 60 shots a game, but he was in the gym 4 hours before he was even required to be there by his team, shooting thousands of jump shots to shoot it maybe 50 to 60 times a game. Like, you go and you go, oh man, it must be nice to have a silky smooth jump shot like that. And you're watching, like, golly, yeah, cool, must be cool. But you miss, because you don't know. Every day he's in the gym at 3:00, 4 or 5 hours of just shooting the exact same shot. So that preparation is exactly why it looks so easy for him during the game.
Well, that reminds me of, I remember this was years ago when I was working with Major League Baseball, but at the time there was a catcher. I wasn't a huge fan of him, but he was catcher for San Francisco Giants, Buster Posey, certainly one of the best catchers of his era. And every baseball player is a little quirky. You know, they have different drills, but the thing is there are a lot of players that are so unbelievably talented, they don't really work very hard. And then there are the guys that are unbelievably talented and they work hard. Yeah. And then you get a Mike Trout or a Mickey Mantle or a Stan Musial. But Buster Posey, what he would do is, if you're familiar with baseball, you have your strike zone, and that strike zone can be gridded out to 9 different ball positions. So, left, middle, and right in the upper part of the strike zone, middle part of the strike zone, the bottom part of the strike zone. So what Buster Posey would do with his swing, he wanted to have a level swing where his bat head was in the basically in the zone the longest to be able to make the best contact. But what he would do is he would take a tee and he would set a ball up, and he would set the ball up in each of those 9 positions. And I think he would try to hit 10 balls directly up the middle of the field from all 9 different places where the ball could possibly land. Now, if you're a hitter that's not a pull hitter and you play all the fields, and which leads to better defensive alignments for you, because you can spray the ball around, you can hit the ball out of the park, to left center to right center, from pole to pole. That was how he got his mechanism for keeping his swing tight. And so you see these things where maybe it's a shooter that, his jump shot is just off for a long time. A hitter that's just off. A pitcher that's just off. A golfer whose swing is just off. A lot of those guys don't go to a new complicated form for how to fix what's going wrong. They go back to the basics. And the basics for Buster Posey was, I just had 2 bad games in a row. I'm going back to the tee, and I'm going back to the 9 grid, the 9 positions of the grid of the strike zone. And I'm just going to try to hit the ball up the middle. And you see guys that have that consistency of action. And I guess that the corollary here for Nehemiah would be, there was consistency of effort, and there had to have been, to be able to get this work done in the short time period that it came. It wasn't like these guys strengthened their hands for the work of the Lord and then took a whole bunch of breaks because, things just kind of went awry. Like, they were ready and they kind of stuck to the basics. Again, they were building walls. So they're stacking bricks on top of one another.
Work.
Like, yeah, it was hard work, but to a degree at that time, it was basic. To someone like me, like, the thought of building a fence would be, overwhelming, but like, these guys are rebuilding walls and it's very, very complicated. But to them, it was just repetitive work, and they just did it. They got after it.
Yeah, and they were extremely efficient. Obviously, I met a guy just the other day. He looked like Santa Claus, but he said, I just asked him, what have you been doing? And he said, well, we actually did this. He showed me this video of this silo that they had put together. He said, this guy bought these. He was going to use them for this purpose, and so he broke it down, and we all met at his place to erect them. And I said, oh gosh, what was that, like a couple day project? Looked like a pretty stout project. He was like, oh well, actually we got it done in 4 hours. I was like, wow, how did you do that? And so, not to go into incredible detail, but he's like, well, the interesting thing is you need a crane. The crane lifts up the top. And he said, just lifts it up a little bit. And then each of the panels, or each of the kind of the wall sections has like 6 of these panels that are curved. And he said, we had my wife on one side handing somebody a bolt, another guy handing another guy a screw, and the guy driving it. And we had this going all the way around. And he said that, and we all just worked together, boom, 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 boom. And then we'd raise it up just a little bit higher, do the same thing. He said, we got it done in 4 hours. I was like, that is incredible. That is incredible. The efficiency, that must have gone into this, had to be something like that.
The efficiency came from the plan.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly right.
And so I guess that's a good corollary for this. For, how were all these people listed here, just dozens and dozens of people, able to do what they were doing? The other thing is they were working on different parts. Some people were working on gates. Some people were working on corners. Some people were working on walls. There had to have been people that were just gophers, like they were going for this and going for that and taking it to the different people. But they knew how the plan worked together. So it wasn't like one family was working on the dung gate, and I just keep going back to the dung gate because I think it's hilarious. But and then another group was working on the wall, because if they're not on the same page, when they come together, when their sections come together and your section's 4 inches higher than their section, now we've got a problem, right? That's going to be something that a scout from a rival tribe or army or something like that, they're going to find that part of the wall and be like, there's where we're going to attack. That's where it's weakest. Like we can kind of get after it. And so they were all together they were in unison while working separately. And you could probably see this the best. And I know not a lot of people in our audience are huge soccer fans, but one of the things where I first noticed this, having not watched very much soccer, whenever I was in my 20s, my wife and I were overseas somewhere, and they do highlights for their sports shows very differently overseas, especially when they're looking at soccer or rugby or cricket or something like that. So over here, you're getting an entire 3-hour game in 45 to 60 seconds. You're getting the home runs, you're getting the touchdowns, you're getting the big dunks. Like that's all you're getting. But when they show soccer highlights over in Europe, they're showing you the build up to the score. They're not showing you the last pass and then the score. They're showing you from where the offense of the other team was dispossessed of the ball and the 60 to 90 second, maybe 2-minute build up that actually led to the goal. That's where you can see the fluidity of the motion of the planning of the structure of the offense of that team. Whereas if you're not a, informed observer of soccer, you would look at that and be like, yeah, just a bunch of dudes that, can't use their hands passing the ball from one another. And, if they get bumped by the air, they roll around on the ground and pretend like they've been shot by a sniper. But like you're getting to see the buildup. And Matt, it goes back to something we were talking about. It's like you're giving your team, each individual member of your team, the parameters of your offense and saying, be creative.
Yeah.
Here are the parameters, but be creative.
Yeah, like a coach comes up with a game plan, Nehemiah comes up with a game. There's structure, there's a system, there's a process, but each individual person has to do their own part, but they do it their way. Like they're doing them. And yeah, that's a great sports analogy. And the best teams that I played on, I do like soccer and I've played soccer to a pretty good extent. Coach put a system in place, but then he trusted us to carry out that system, but also allowed us to be creative in how we did that. It's not robotic. I know what I'm supposed to do, but I have some freedom to do what I think or what I interact with or what comes across to be creative to carry out that plan.
And not to decentralize command, right?
Right.
You can make those decisions.
Yep.
Not to beat a dead horse, but everybody's got to pull their weight. One of the things I use as an analogy in my practice is I say, imagine a football team. Who are your best players on the football team? They're like, it's a quarterback, running back, wide receivers. I was like, that's great. I was like, well, imagine your spine is like a team. Okay, you've got X number of thoracic, lumbar segments, whatever. Imagine like some of the, imagine your linemen just said, hey, we're going to sit out this series. You guys are the best players on the team. You got this, right? How that would go. That would not go well. Imagine even 1 or 2 of them doing that. I mean, it's not that you could not maybe pick up the slack a little bit and adjust and be creative or whatever, but we are meant to work as a team, just like the body of Christ, as we see in like 1 Corinthians 12, is meant to work and everybody do their part and do it well.
So speaking of that, I want to read something real quick and then ask a question. So then Eliashib, the high priest, rose up with his brethren the priest and built the sheep gate. They consecrated it and hung its doors. They built as far as the Tower of the 100 and consecrated it, then as far as the Tower of Hananel. So my question is, this is Nehemiah 3:1, the very first verse. What's the first gate that they built?
The sheep gate.
The sheep gate.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. That's a very astute point.
So the sheep gate was the gate through which the animals were brought into the city, including the temple sacrifices. This gate reminds us of Jesus Christ, the Lamb of God, who died for the sins of the world.
And it's also the high priests, or the high priest and the priests are the one that built it.
And the high priest and the priest are the ones that built it.
But that's also interesting too, because like you'd think of all the people that are exempt from building the wall, the high priest whose job is to go into the holies of holies, the holy of holies. Sorry, Joby.
What's funny is I immediately thought of that. Anytime anyone misspeaks, Joby Martin somewhere in Florida being like, these idiots, why didn't anyone go to Bible college?
They're responsible for, the the spiritual welfare of the people. Like you'd think that, okay, yeah, if anybody's exempt, it's the high priest, but no, he's in here. And that's a great point.
Well, it's
Zach.
not me, right? This is weird.
No.
Study Bible.
You're such a genius, Zach.
yeah.
Wow.
You still-
Joby will never be mad at you.
Yeah.
He still brought it up though. So.
But I will say, I mean, obviously Christ has not come on the scene yet. So this is why I love the Bible so much. It sort of self-defends. And the fact that you could read through something like we just set this up as being one of those chapters that it can be kind of difficult to get through, but as you dig deeper, it's incredible.
So another thing that brings up for me, Zach, and again, I don't want to read too much. Is poeticism a word? Anyway, I'm tagging it to myself. I just trademarked it. I don't want to have any poeticism. It reminds me of Boondock Saints. What's the symbology there? But the word you're looking for is symbolism. Symbolism. Anyway, you guys shouldn't watch that movie. It's terrible. But so they're starting with the focus of sacrifice. So they're building a gate through which they will bring blood sacrifice. And just trying to really kind of figure this out before I kind of say it, but I think this is okay. If you were to describe Christianity or the Bible to a stranger, I think the first word you could use is sacrifice. Hey, can you explain to me what the gospel is? Sacrifice. So
Grace.
it's the sacrifice of God giving his son to us so that we could even have grace.
Yeah.
And so grace is the foundation, sacrifice is the foundation with which grace is built upon. And I think that that's very important that you start there, that there is a sacrificial element, but also these men of God, these high priests, they sacrificed their standing, I guess. They lowered themselves, as it were, a la what Jesus did, lowering himself as the ultimate high priest to be a man, a lowly man that had to travail and work and sweat and, go to the bathroom and all those different things. And then everything else that came upon him, that was heaped upon him because God sent him for that express purpose. And so it's the sacrifice that they started with. And again, we don't know that that's the first thing that happened, but it's the first thing that Nehemiah mentions. And so, dude, but I've never once even thought about that.
Yeah, it's incredible. And then going back to just straight leadership tactics, right? The fact that he gets this thing cranked up, they start at this gate and they've got the priest pitching in, they've got their little coalition built, right? And you can get momentum with that, with everybody watching. Yeah. And then it just goes from there.
Yeah. And even just the order, the order of the way things were built, the temple was built first. And I was thinking through that. I was like, well, you think the 10 Commandments, like what are the first 3 commandments about? They're about putting God first. And so building that temple before the walls and all, I think there's something to be even said about that in addition to what you just brought up here just moments ago.
So I actually want to kind of go back a little bit to, I know we're using a lot of sports analogies with this particular thing, but I think there's something important here. Eric, when you were talking about the valuation of players, right? And so the tradable sports cards that are the most valuable are the quarterbacks and the wide receivers. And, every now and then you'll get a big time cornerback or middle linebacker or something like that. But those are kind of the big guys. In soccer, it's your forwards, it's your strikers. There weren't a whole lot of people like having big discussions about their favorite defenseman, in the Premier League or something like that. That's what nerds would get down to. They get down to the actual level like, this is my favorite defenseman. But like, the valuation of players. When we talk about the body, Zach, I think you were talking about this earlier. When we evaluate the body, we put different emphasis on sexier skills. And so the body needs a whole lot of different types of people or different types of things in order to operate optimally, right? The spine is pretty darn important, but so is your pinky finger, right? If you've never jammed one of your fingers or toes, you have no idea how important that particular finger or toe is until you don't have full use of it or painful use of it, right?
True.
But we put preachers and teachers and exhorters in this high level, right? Those guys, they have the sexiest things. The worship leaders, maybe they're actual worship leaders in that they're actually Christians and they actually read the Bible and they want to have theological truths in the words that they sing. They don't just sing to Jesus like he's their boyfriend. But like, those are people that's like, oh, they're so amazing. Their voice is so good. Look how great they play the guitar. And like, this is amazing. Like, they're just entranced by it. But then we don't think of the people that prepare the coffee in the same way. We don't think about the people that prepare that fill the baptismal up with water.
Make sure the chairs are in the right place.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a good time for us maybe even to pause and reflect on that. that regardless of what your skill set is, it is important to the body because the left guard is incredibly important to Trevor Lawrence's safety. He just is. Because if the left guard doesn't do his job, Trevor Lawrence could be smashed before the ball even gets to the linebacker, before he takes his 3, 5, 7-step drop to do anything that he needs to do. Like, those are very, very important people to the overall offense. The same thing applies to the church.
What's the common thread? What's the common thread there? Like, it's all servanthood. The worship leader is serving. The pastor is serving. The guy who makes the coffee is serving. Like, everybody is serving. And I think just like everybody's building a wall, like that's the common ground. And how audacious of us, or how prideful of us to think, oh, I can't really like do anything because I'm not a pastor. I'm not a worship leader. I'm not, in a leadership role at the church. Like, we're kind of diminishing God, aren't we? Like, I'm just a guy, man. You're a guy that needs to show up and serve. Show up, serve.
Yeah, that's a good point. What do you think is going on with somebody that may have this perspective that they're only watching the top guys or girl, whatever? Probably the question that you should be asking yourself is, how am I participating? Not what am I going to do, any of that, just how am I participating? Because as soon as you're showing up to church or to whatever your situation is and you're having to put in some effort, you will very quickly begin to appreciate the coffee guy and the person taking out the trash, person marching across the parking lot to make sure that everybody gets in safe, all the way up to and including the top dog. So if you don't appreciate what's being provided around you, the question I'd ask is, how am I participating?
Yeah. And I think, so there's a very important thing. I read a book years ago. It's called Outlaw Platoon. And so this was about, some stuff that was happening during the GWAT and, really, really terrible situation. A lot of guys died. And I remember something in that book when these guys come back from being outside the wire. They come back to base where these other soldiers were, basically living in they were certainly living in peace. They weren't in any danger where they were at. But they have Starbucks. They've got a gym. They've got AC that works. They've got hot showers.
Oh, wow.
And, these guys came back they're covered in blood and sweat and human excrement. And they see all these people, and the guys that just came back, they're in the back of the food line. And the author remembers being like, I could have killed everybody in there in that exact moment. I was so angry. And I remember talking about that with my buddy Eddie Penny, who was a SEAL, not just a SEAL. He was in SEAL Team 6, and he's, he's been as downrange as downrange gets. I remember talking to him about that, and he recalled a moment where he came back to it was Thanksgiving or Christmas. It was one of those. And he came back, and the dinner that they provided on base, here they are, they come back, they're tired, they're whatever, and they just want to get some turkey and some stuffing and some mashed potatoes and all that. By the time they got there, all these dudes that had just been sitting on base and in complete safety, they'd eaten everything. The only thing that was left was rolls.
Ooh.
And in that moment, those guys that had just gone downrange and killed a bunch of terrorists and, did the stuff that, only they were equipped to do, he was very, very angry that he's sitting there eating, stale rolls, and he didn't get any turkey and all that. But he said, Kyle, later when I reflected on that, I kept thinking, none of the stuff we did downrange was possible without those guys.
Yep.
Nothing.
Yeah.
So the armorer that never shoots the weapon outside the wire, he made sure my weapon worked so that whenever I was pointing it at a terrorist, that it wasn't going to jam, it wasn't going to mess up, because if it jammed and messed up, then maybe I die instead of him, right? And all these logistical people that are, the most risk that they are at is whether or not their plane that lands them in Afghanistan is going to crash. Yeah. Like they're not having bullets whiz past their head. There are gradations to people's service and how much danger they were in, but they're making it possible for those other people to do the things that they're doing. So all the stuff Nehemiah is doing as a governor of sorts in Jerusalem at the time would not have been possible without the 12-year-old boys that were carrying bricks back and forth to the masons that were getting the work done. So I know that it was kind of a long time to elucidate that, but it's so unbelievably important.
There's two extremes there too, right? Like we can think, oh, I'm so low, I can't offer anything. But on the flip side, we can also think, like you're describing with these stories of, Navy SEALs, I can prop myself up so high that I feel so entitled that when I do this, why am I not getting this? That's not a good place to be either. So there's two extremes there. I think.
Many eyes.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. I mean,
exactly.
It is interesting because there is a balance. I mean, we're obviously on a SEAL discussion here a little bit, but I go back to if you're on a team from a leadership perspective, you don't necessarily want to be on the front or the back. You want to be able to have perspective of everything that's going on, and you need everybody to be able to slot in and participate however they need to. But your leadership, you need to be involved front line, but your team needs to understand that in order for them to be safe, you need to be detached and have perspective as well. So I think for me, it goes back to, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? And you just have to look around and go, how can I make this the most effective? And and it encourages everybody to participate, right? And that's really what we're after.
I also think that if we look at anything in history where great things were accomplished, so again, sports analogy, someone wins a Super Bowl, they win the World Series, a mission is completed and you don't lose any of your guys. But as you were talking, I was thinking about the Sistine Chapel and the work of Michelangelo. And guys, if you haven't been to Rome, if you haven't been to Vatican City, like you need to spend some time in St. Peter's Basilica. You need to look at the Last Judgment. You need to go in there and you need to know what it smells like inside the Sistine Chapel. You need to look up and just see that. Do y'all think that Michelangelo built the scaffolding?
Right.
When he was painting?
Right.
Do you think he was getting up and down off the scaffolding to get his paint? Or was he focused on the work of creating perhaps the greatest piece of art that we still have in modernity? And again, Michelangelo is the name that we remember, the name of the painting and the different details. Those are the things that we remember, but who made it possible? And then you've heard this, I don't even know if this story actually happened, but when that guy, it may have been Kennedy, that was getting a tour of NASA, and he's, he sees a janitor, sweeping up the floor, and he asks the janitor, hey, what do you do here? He goes, I'm putting a man on the moon. And it's like, yeah, that's cute for like business school and all that, but it's a great lesson to where it's like, what if they were at a filthy work environment at NASA? And they literally, like, the engineers couldn't get any of their work done because there's coffee stains all over their workstations and everything's sticky and they're distracted mentally. They can't focus on the things that they need to focus on because they're dealing with all this other crap that is not their job. And so I think that that's important. Just again, anytime you look at something that is important and that has been done at a high level, a whole lot of hands went into that, not just the sexy hands.
I think that also goes back to our identity. Where does our identity come from? Is our identity wrapped up in what we do on a day-to-day basis? I'm the janitor that I just take out the trash or I just sweep and mop, or is my identity in Christ? And I understand that what I do every day is not only in service to other people, but is in service to God.
I talked to a guy a couple months ago who runs a pretty significant executive coaching firm and startup business. So if you have a business and you're at a certain threshold, you can come to his group and they've got all these coaches and different people, right? And we were having lunch and he said, Zach, one of the issues that we see with people who have been successful is they sell these companies and financially they're set. And then they go through significant depression. And so much of our programs are set on trying to help them understand what their next, phase is. And it's just them attaching their identity to what they do. And I've seen, myself, I've had experience with that as a younger person. I mean, it was a big deal when I had to figure out that this is not me.
Yeah.
I had somebody come in and say, I don't work for this company. I work at this company for my family. And that was in a professional context. So we would add to that and say, I represent God, and that's what I attach my worth to, and then everything else flows from that.
Right now, I'm remembering Colossians 3:22 and 23. It says, "Whatever you do, do it heartily, working heartily for God and not for man." And so there's the idea of who we're working for, as you just kind of mentioned, but also there's this idea that whatever we do, whether you're in here you're the perfumer, or whether you're the priest, or whether you're a small child working alongside your dad, whatever you do it well. I think that's really important. I want to share from 1 Peter 2:4 this, because I was just thinking about like all the stones they were placing, and I was reminded of us as living stones. So let me read this. And coming to him as to a living stone, which has been rejected by men, but is choice and precious in the sight of God. You also as living stones are being built up as a spiritual house for a holy priesthood to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. And it goes on and talks more about the rejection of that stone and Jesus and that becoming the chief cornerstone. But just thinking about like, there was a very physical work going on here of them laying stones, but practically speaking, we also are being built up, not only individually through sanctification, but also as corporately through our church and through the fellowship that we have with one another to be able to accomplish God's work. Not because he needs us, but because he allows us to be a part of his grander story and commissions us to find joy in glorifying him through it.
Eric, that's actually one of the things I wanted to talk about in preparation for Nehemiah 3 is you see this throughout the entire book of Ezra and Nehemiah, but certainly in Nehemiah 1, 2, and 3 is God does his work through people. I think sometimes Christians think that they are just innocent bystanders or just spectators in what God is doing. And they treat it that way. And Matt, I don't know if you said it this one or on last week's episode where it's like, God can move mountains, but he expects you to bring a shovel.
Right.
Like that type of attitude is important. And I feel like, maybe I'm wrong, I'm curious how y'all feel about this. Most Christians are completely fine being a spectator because they heard some dork in junior high say, let go and let God. And they're just like, that's how I'm going to operate from here on out forever. And it's like, I'm not going to actually do anything because God's going to do it. Like, what is my work compared to God? And it's like, you're asking the wrong question. The wrong question is, what is God going to do through you using your hands?
Mm-hmm.
We serve a God that hung the stars and literally created the earth. But he loves us so much that he invites us to be a part of that plan and to be a part of that story, not as bystanders, like you're saying, but like active participants. The Bible is full of, it's all crooked pencils. I think you use that a lot. Making straight lines. He's using crooked pencils to make straight lines, but the pencil still has to do the thing. Like, God's sovereignty does not mean that men are not active participants. And Nehemiah is a perfect example of that.
Matt, one commentary I read called these people responsible human agents.
Yeah.
All three of those words are very important. They're not just agents, they're human agents, right? Because God has agency control over the whole of humanity. He can tell the rocks what to do. He can tell the wind what to do. He can tell the birds what to do. So he has agency. These are human agents that are responsible. They have responsibilities that require discipline to do the things that need to be done. And especially when we get into Nehemiah 4, like I'm just chomping at the bit to get into Nehemiah 4 because so many things in Nehemiah 4 seem, very unchristlike and kind of mean. And why would they even need to do that? And, I've heard people even say before, they're like, you don't need to exercise. You don't need to take care of yourself. You've got Jesus. You don't need to get a vaccine. And no, I'm not talking about the vaccine. He's like, you don't need any vaccines because you have Jesus. And it's like, wait a minute. I remember when Joby said something to me before, and by the time y'all are hearing this, it will have been after my voice surgery. So we'll see how that goes. But he's like, Kyle, if you get this surgery and your voice is better and it's fixed and all that, 200 years ago, we would have called that a miracle. Now it's called a procedure, but it's still a miracle. Like it is a common grace that we have now. Surgery is a common grace. Like I'm reading through a book right now that's going through some, medical practices that were happening in the 16 and 1700s. And it's like, I'm glad I'm alive. Right. People are like, is there an era you would want to go back and live? No, maybe to yesterday. I would want to go back to yesterday
maybe 2019.
Yeah. Like something like that. Maybe an era where I still got an iPhone, but then I can kind of like time the market just a little bit. Yeah. No, I don't want to go back to Roman times to live. Yeah. I'd like to go down to visit, but then come back so I can eat food in air conditioning. Right. And so, but again, I don't want to get too far away from the point there. But again, there's a lot of agency and responsibility there.
There are two things at tension here. And I think a lot of people get hung up on, and I think, you kind of speak to this. I think, people who would consider themselves Calvinists can really get hung up on this, but there's two tension throughout the entire Bible, that God is sovereign and his will be done no matter what, and that man is responsible. And I think we can swing the pendulum one way or the other. But I like what Spurgeon says on that. And I really liked your interview a few months ago with Joby, where you asked him specifically about that. His response was great. Like, these things are at tension, but they're both true and they don't contradict each other because they're both in the Bible. Like, so, and Nehemiah is probably one of the greatest examples of that, of God's will is being done because God ordained it to be done. But also Nehemiah and all these people are active participants to carry that out because he is allowing that to happen.
Yeah, and you might as well just get used to this, because I can't imagine that we get to heaven and we just, I mean, I get it, we'll rest and we will have freedom from the temptation of sin and that sort of thing. But aren't we going to still have responsibilities? Aren't we still going to be working? You know, so I mean, if you don't like to do it right now, you're not going to like heaven very much.
Yeah.
Well, we know how it's set up pre-fall, right? There were jobs to be done.
Yeah.
We weren't just idle, or he wasn't. Adam wasn't. You know, I guess just reading this a little bit, just to get into some of the details on it. Wiersbe does a good job, I think, trying to tie the gates and the different things into things that are relevant. And one here that I highlighted, I thought was interesting, is he says the refuse gate, I think you were talking a little bit about this, was located at the southernmost tip of the city near the pool of Siloam. It was
a nasty pool, I'm sure.
It was a main exit to the valley of Hinnom, where the city disposed of its garbage. The Greek word Gehenna refers to the valley of Hinnom, identifying this as the area that Jesus used as a picture of hell.
Yeah.
The sanitary disposal of the waste materials is essential to the health of a city. It reminds us that, like the city, each of us individually must get rid of whatever defiles us, or it may destroy us. And it references 2 Corinthians 7:1 and 1 John 1:9. So in these words, this implies that, you know, we have some work to do along with God to identify those things. And I know in the last episode we talked about, you know, some of the things that we need to be working to rid ourselves of and all that. So I just wanted to kind of pull in some of the specifics that they're talking about here. There's a lot of different gates and different things I know you could gloss over, but I think there's plenty of ties to dig into.
And right after that, in verses 15, 16, talks about the king's garden. And I just thought it was interesting. I was reading a quote from Charles Spurgeon. It was actually part of his sermon. Just as a side note, there were 6 different gardens of the king. There was the Garden of Eden. There was the Garden of Gethsemane. There was the garden tomb. There was the human heart, the church as a whole, and then ultimately the Garden of Paradise in heaven. So just, again, trying to tie back a little bit to Ezra 3.
Good old Calvinist Spurge.
Why are you looking at me? Why do you say that? And then look at me. Because the problem is all these dang reform nerds are going to be like, oh, I got to ask Kyle some questions. It's like, I don't want to answer your questions, okay? I got things I got to do. The thing that I feel like is important in all of this as well, and maybe this is an overarching point, maybe as we wrap to a close here on Nehemiah 3, is that humans don't give themselves enough. They don't think about their own responsibility enough, I feel like. And man, I saw a video the other day, and it's a video that I've seen before, but there was a woman that had, I think, 10 kids, and like 8 of them were living with her in like a hotel room or something like that. Mm-hmm. And she's like, someone's got to take care of these kids. Look at all these kids I got, and somebody better take care of them. And I'm just thinking to myself, you and the multiple baby daddies, that's who. But we've been lulled to sleep in modernity that we make the bed, but we don't have to lie in it, right? Uncle Sam's going to take care of it. Local government's going to take care of it. You know, some ministry or whatever is going to take pity on us and those types of things. And if that is seeping out of your normal life, it's going to seep into all the most important areas of your life. So raising of children, having your job, and creating things for society. Because again, point to any societal ill, right? Any single one that we have today. Think of your favorite one. Guys, got it in your brain? Great. You can point to a lot of things, and if you were to only do a univariate analysis, you can say, father's not being in the home. You know, kids not being educated, father's not being in the home. Kids joining gangs, father's not being in the home. Kids being violent, kids getting pregnant, kids getting other people pregnant at a young age, like murders, rapes, father's not being in the home.
Yep. But
we love to point to everything else. And we don't live in a shame culture anymore. That's one thing. I'm reading a book right now, and, you know, depending on the timing, I may have already interviewed this person, but it's like the history of abortion in America from like the 1600s to today. It's a 500-page book, and it is a whirlwind. But they're talking about, like, back in the day, this was, I guess, fairly common that women would be hesitant to sleep with a man unless they were married, obviously, or unless they promised to be married. And so you would have these men that would say, let's have sex and, we're going to get married, right? And then when you know it, they would do that and then they would renege on that.
Sure.
And if the girl got pregnant, they would super renege on that or something. However, the communities, if they found out that a man slept with a woman and impregnated her or just slept with her in general, the community would say, you're going to wife her. That's what you're going to do. You're going to marry her. You made a decision. So that's where the whole concept of a shotgun wedding. But in that time, they didn't even need the shotgun because the shame that came from the community was so much scarier than the potential of the girl's dad putting a shotgun in your back and marching you down the aisle.
I think that speaks to community. Like, what we are built to be in community and have that accountability. We're called to be where our feet are. And if I sin and have sex with someone outside of God's ordained plan, which is marriage, okay, be where your feet are. Step up, show up, be a man, and like carry out the call that you have. Like, it's not always I'm called to go save 10,000 people. I'm called to do this. I'm called to do that. I'm called to serve my wife and my 2 kids. And I don't always get that right, but that's my calling, and that's where I've got to be.
I know you've got your laptop up. I'm going to do something.
Hey, you know what? It's just, we can't really see the timer. So for anybody, I think the camera actually turned off. But yeah.
So here's the 2 things. The first one is, I don't know if you saw Ray Comfort posted a recent video, and he said, I thought this is interesting. If you get in a car accident with a pregnant person, the baby dies, it's manslaughter, right?
You can be charged with double murder in some states.
Yeah, there you go.
Or double vehicular murder or homicide.
Okay. So you could walk down that path. I just didn't know if you'd seen that. These are 2 comments that I read that probably hit me the hardest in all of this study, so I just thought I'd throw these out there for everybody to look at. In 329, these are the comments about 329. The east gate led directly to the temple and is probably what we know today as the Golden Gate. Tradition says that Jesus entered the temple on Palm Sunday through this gate. In the 16th century, the gate was sealed with blocks of stone by the Turkish Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. Jewish and Christian tradition both connect the Golden Gate with the coming of the Messiah to Jerusalem, and the Muslims associate it with the future judgment. Last part. Ezekiel saw the glory of the Lord depart from the temple at the east gate, and the Lord will return to the city the same way. So you have every reason to associate this gate with Christ's return and to remind yourself to abide in him, that when he appears, we may have confidence and not be ashamed before him at his coming. So for me, a couple of quick highlights would just be, go look at the videos. You can see this. If you want to get a sense of how real this is, it says this is where the glory of God exited. This is where Christ is coming back specifically. And that last sentence about we don't want to be ashamed when he comes back. If you feel like you're living in some unrepented sin or you've got some issues that are going on, get that cleaned up. And if you need help, get it.
I think it's a tremendous point. And I will say, last night before we recorded this, Zach, you sent a message to all of us with 2 different videos. One was a 3D rendering of the city, and then there was another one that was kind of like a historical retelling of kind of what was happening in that area. And some of you guys like the maps in your Bible. Well, there are things that you can get because, we wonder about the size of certain things and how that is in reference to whatever. And if you've never been to Israel, it's kind of hard to kind of understand. We think of Jerusalem as way bigger than it actually is because we've never actually been there and seen it. But it does give you an idea, the scope of the work, but also, again, as we've mentioned, if you're reading the Bible as if all of this points to the narrative of Christ, that points to the gospel, then the mentioning of the sheep gate first, as you just taught all of us at this table and a lot of people in the audience, that is not insignificant. That's also not by happenstance, and that's also not by accident. Another text that you sent to everybody last night is you're going through the Action Bible with your son, and wouldn't you know it, you turned the page last night before you come in here to do this recording to Ezra, which is the setup for Nehemiah, which is setting up things in history that point to the gospel. And I said kind of tongue-in-cheek, must have been a coincidence. Like that is just so happened to be the next thing that you and your son were going over. And so there's certainly, we don't live in a world full of coincidences. Not everything that ever happens in history points to God, but this is something that it's like we clearly see things that are pointing to God and his redemptive story and humanity. So guys, hopefully that has been a good, understanding of Nehemiah 3 to where there is enough that you can glean from this. You may need help from commentaries. You may need help from the Holy Spirit just telling you, hey, there's something here. Don't skip this. Browning is what you were talking about earlier. Like, hey, there's got to be an application here that I have to find. Sure. It's just not going to be readily apparent. It's not going to jump out and smack me in the face. But we're going to just have to leave that there for now. But come back next Sunday where we are going to dig into Nehemiah 4. Ooh, boy, oh boy, oh boy. I'm so excited to dig into Nehemiah 4. Like, that is worth the price of admission for the entire book of Nehemiah. But make sure you read Nehemiah 4 before you come here next week. But before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. And just like every week, the only link there is a donation link, guys. In order to pull off the stuff that we need to pull off, we need your help. We do get a little bit of money from sponsorships and different things like that, but it is donations that allows us to do all the work that we're doing to equip men around the globe to push back darkness. So hop on board. We have one-time givers. We have a bunch of monthly givers. And just as a quick aside, I used to send emails to all you guys thanking you every single month that you did your donation, whether it was $10 or $100 or $500 or whatever. And it's kind of become too cumbersome for me to do that. But just know that I am not any less thankful for every single one of you guys, because that is money you could have spent on you. You could have spent it on your wife. You could have spent it on your kids. You could have spent it on any number of things, but you chose to sacrifice that to give it to us so that we can equip men, again, around the globe to be able to push back darkness. So we're so thankful for you guys, but we need more guys just like you. Go to Undaunted.Life/donate or click on the link in the description. Thank you guys for listening to this episode. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band August Burns Red for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is our song Cutting the Tides, which is off their 10th anniversary re-recording of their album Leveler. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.